Welcome back to the Manage to Win podcast. I've got Dr. Laura Gallaher on the show today. We talk about radical self-acceptance. There's something here for everybody. If you do well in this area as a leader, you can learn how to do this better to help your people. And she also wrote a book, The Missing Links, Launching a High-Performing Company Culture. It's a great conversation, a lot of valuable things that you can take and apply yourself, with others, and in your organization. Let's dive in. Dr. Laura Gallaher. Dr. Laura, wasn't there like a famous Dr. Laura where people would call it a Dr. Laura or something
Yes,
like that?
she had a radio show. I think she still does technically have a radio show. Yeah.
I saw that as her. I was like, am I talking with Dr. Laura? Oh no, I could be in trouble. Anyway, so you have a lot of things going on that are all seem very positive to me. I want to talk about your book a little bit, some of the things that you discuss in your talks, and then you do this assessment thing that you had me take, which the audience might think is funny because it's about me, not because of your assessment. But why don't we start with, you talk about radical self-acceptance.
Yes.
And today I think we have a lot of very wounded people out there. And so what is radical self-acceptance and why is that going to benefit me?
So love this question. And let me actually share a story if I could before
stories.
Yes, before I hit you with my definition. So, and I've got so many stories that pertain to self-acceptance, but this one was the first time that I think I really realized how much I was just full of it, right? So I was in my early 30s, and as a bit of context leading up to this, I was working for NASA while I was working on my PhD, and I was dating my boyfriend at the time, and we were starting to get serious, and he wanted to take it to the next level and get married. And I said, please do not propose to me until I finish school, because if I have to choose between finishing a dissertation and planning a wedding, I fear I will never finish my degree. And I assured him that my level of busy was temporary. I told him it's only going to be like this until I finish school. And he believed me.
Okay.
So, what a sucker. I believed me too. That's the truth. So I finished the degree, and he waited a couple months and then proposed. And then it became all about planning the wedding, which was beautiful and lovely. And then it became all about the house. I had moved into his house, and then it was changing all the things in the house. So it felt more like my house too. But then it was buying a new house. And we did like a custom design house, which, have you done that, David?
No.
Oh my gosh. The sheer number of decisions was so overwhelming. And so this was this huge project. And then we move in and we still had more home updates to do. And so I've really never changed my level of busy and hustle. And then I start my own business, and I'm still working for NASA, but I start my own business on the side. And so this moment, this story, it's like a Wednesday evening, and I've just finished a full day of working at NASA, but I'm now in my home office upstairs working on my business. And my husband comes to the door and he says, hey, Laura, Patrick and Kelly invited us to go to a movie. You want to go? And I'm working all busy, and I look at him, I say, oh, babe, I'd love to, but I can't. Like I've got to work. He said, come on, Laura, you're always too busy. And I said, I know, but it's only going to be like this until. And that was the moment that I realized I have no idea what the end of that sentence is. Like there was nothing that I could point to that actually felt true anymore to say that I wouldn't just keep being busy and just in this like hustle culture all the time and like not making time for fun. And so I'm just sitting there realizing that I don't know how to finish this sentence. And, he looks at me and he says, if you think you're not good enough now, you never will be.
Amen. Yeah.
Just like, and I could just feel like my stomach drop and my heart jump into my throat, like all at the same time. And it was just this really tough moment of recognizing that he was right. I was constantly hustling for a sense of worthiness that I could never reach. It was this horrible hamster wheel. And so that was one of my first and most powerful moments of seeing that I'm not embodying self-acceptance. I am working so hard to better myself and improve myself, but from a place of fear, from a place of feeling like I'm not enough. And so radical self-acceptance, to answer your question, is being okay with who you are right now without changing a thing. And that includes your imperfections and your flaws and your talents and strengths. So being truly and fully okay with who you are right now, that's radical self-acceptance.
So, one of the simplest examples of how a parent can instill not good enough, intentionally or unintentionally, is a friend of mine, Nick, and he used to play soccer. And he would come off the field having scored 2 goals. And his dad would say, "You did well today, but if you did this, that, and the other thing, you might have gotten 3 or 4 goals." So it's just like, never. And
never, yeah.
So rather than delve into, at least at the moment, where that comes from, which we can if you want to, but so you're talking about a radical self-acceptance is I'm going to accept myself where I am today, positives and negatives, blah, blah, blah. However, how do you then move from there? Because we still want to, most of us want to improve or change in certain ways that can be healthy if we pursue them properly. But how do we move from to, you got to have, it sounds like what you had to do, you had to have this pause. Like, whoa, wait a minute.
Yeah.
I got to be okay with where I am today. How long did that take? You had the deja vu moment, but that's got to be a journey. Yeah.
It did take some time. And I really like, David, where you're going with this line of questioning, because the thing that had kept me on this hamster wheel of this hustle culture and constantly using fear as my driver was a misconception that self-acceptance and self-improvement were opposites. I had this crazy idea in my head that I could either be self-accepting or I could improve myself. And I learned about paradox theory through something called Harrison assessments. Fantastic assessment. I am obsessed with paradox theory now. I have been for several years. So self-acceptance and self-improvement are not opposites. The opposite of self-acceptance is actually self-judgment. So I can focus on self-improvement from a lens of self-judgment, or I can focus on self-improvement through a lens of self-acceptance. They coexist. So you can choose to be high on both. You can be high on self-acceptance and high on self-improvement. And the research is pretty clear that actually you're going to learn and grow faster when you are approaching all of your improvement from that place of feeling enough right now.
Well, that makes sense. I think Joyce Meyer calls it a rejection mindset, something like that. Very powerful. And because if you have the rejection mindset and you try to improve, wouldn't that mean that you're going to focus on where you fail each time you try to improve versus, oh, I took one step forward?
Absolutely. Yeah, I wrote that down because I haven't heard of her before or that, but I would love to learn more. I'm always so eager to pick up, more of what people are putting down around this. There's a book called The Gap and the Gain by Dan Sullivan and Dr. Benjamin Hardy. Are you familiar with that one?
No, I love the title.
Such an important read for any entrepreneur because, Dan Sullivan is in his 70s now. He's been working with entrepreneurs for, I think, like 50 years. So maybe it's 40 years, some insane number of years. And he would notice that these entrepreneurs would just constantly, he'd be like, hey, so what have you been able to achieve since last time? Or, like nothing. And they were just unable to see any of the progress that they were making because they kept focusing on what was ahead of them. And I actually remember I grew up in the Phoenix, Arizona area, which now I'm in Florida. There's no mountains here. It's very flat. The only mountains we have here are like landfills. But in Phoenix, I lived just a few minutes walk away from these different foothills. We'd go hiking, and I would have the experience almost every time of hiking, and it's Phoenix, so it's crazy hot. And I keep looking at the top of this mountain that we're climbing, thinking, man, it's still got a long way to go. But then we would pause for a water break, and I would turn around and I was like, whoa, do you see how far we've come?
Yeah.
It was just this like, dang, how did that happen? And that as a metaphor is so crucial, not just for entrepreneurs, but really any high achiever, self-starter, super driven person, to like give yourself some credit for how much work you have done. Let yourself focus on the gain and not over focus on the gap. The gap is always going to be there. Right? I mean, David, for the people that listen to your show, they're always going to be focused on self-improvement, right? That's part of why they listen to you.
Oh, yeah.
Because, they want to grow. They want to learn. They see things about themselves they want to improve. That is a horrible reason to not accept yourself right now, just because you see something about yourself that you want to improve upon, because you're always going to see something about yourself that you would like to improve upon. And that was another like mind-blowing moment for me of like, okay, you're right. Yeah, I don't want to just reject myself over and over again just because there's something I can improve.
Well, Laura, I'm curious whether in your own life or one of your clients or something you've studied, but we live in such a fast-paced world. How much has, quote unquote, the pause been enabled people to do what you're saying? Because we move so fast. It's like when you're talking about when you're going up the mountain. It's like, I'm just focused, I'm going up this mountain. I'm going. But it took the pause for you to look back, to have some gratitude of, whoa, something happened here.
Yes.
But so many of us were just like, okay, what's the to-do list today? What's my schedule look like? Where we got to go? What do I got to do? Where am I trying?
Yeah.
So how much does a habit of taking the pause, I mean, through my spiritual life, and this is open to anybody's spiritual beliefs, but it took me 30 years to get clued into one of the possibly the greatest strength of a spiritual life is the quiet time and prayer time versus I'm going to church, I'm participating in this men's group, I'm leading this kid's Sunday school, I'm doing this activity, that activity. Not that my schedule was overwhelming, but I was activity-oriented versus relationship-oriented. And that whole pause thing, but anyway, I'm talking too much, but...
You're not. No, I love your contribution.
How much does the pause play into it? And if it does play into it, how have you seen people develop that habit? Because that's a tough habit.
Yeah. The pause is hugely important in this. Yes, partly because what you want to do is pattern disruption. So we fall into these patterns as entrepreneurs, as high achievers, of in the doing mode. And there's a component to it that can actually be very addictive, truly. The doing and the feeling busy. I think that a lot of us also received intentional or unintentional messaging when we were growing up that rewarded a lot of doing and the activity. And, well-meaning parents, every time I invite people to introspect and reflect on how some of their early life experiences have shaped their beliefs today, I run into somebody that's like, no, I love my parents. They're what? And I'm like, yeah, of course you do. Of course you do. And they're wonderful humans and they're imperfect humans, and we all are. And it's okay to let yourself see how your child brain interpreted signals from your parents that were probably not what they intended. It's not like the child has the perfect view of what is. You're letting yourself see, how did I misinterpret my dad telling me, and I'm using your example from before, how did I maybe misinterpret my dad telling me if I did these things differently, I'd be able to get 3 or 4 goals? How did I accidentally internalize that as I am not enough no matter what I do? That's what my child brain believed. I, as an adult now, I can reperceive that whole situation and I can adopt a new belief system, which is the deepest work that I help people with. How do I adopt a new belief system in order to change my patterns today? So pausing is huge. And that moment of let me stop and take a look back and see the gain. I also call this taking credit. What are things that I can allow myself to take credit for? Instead of just the constant inner critic, the constant beating myself up, how can I allow myself to feel good about the areas where I am making progress, where I have demonstrated improvement? And that's kind of like building a muscle. If you've never done it, it's going to feel strange, maybe even really difficult to even come up with what it is. But if you've never done a push-up before, that actually was me, David, when I finished my PhD. The other thing that I didn't mention this in my story, but I like threw myself into fitness. And I was like, I'm going to get a personal trainer. I'm going to go to the gym all the time. I'm going to be really fit and strong, which I was. But my trainer had me down on the mat and he wanted me to do a push-up and he wouldn't let me do any modifications and he wouldn't let me do it with poor form. And I literally couldn't get off the mat. Like I couldn't do it at that point. I didn't have the strength. And he literally pointed and laughed at me. So he's a great trainer. He was young.
Yeah.
But 3 months after working with him, I could legit do 50 push-ups, full-on push-ups, not even modified. Wow. Because over 3 months, I was building those muscles. So when you can pause and you can let yourself look back at the gain and you can say, where can I take credit for the areas that I've made improvements or made progress? That is building up the muscle. And a lot of this is, how can I build up the same level of strength and familiarity with feeling good about my contributions as that inner critic that loves to find everything wrong with what I've done? How can I give them an equal seat at the table? Because when you get them working together, it's wonderful. That's what you want. That's that high self-acceptance and high self-improvement.
Yeah, so I'm curious, just to be candid and share part of my journey right now, and I'm much farther along life's path than you. And I don't mean that to put you down. I mean just by age.
Sure.
And yeah, so, but I'm at 68 trying to learn how to pause in the morning, take some time in prayer that's not God is a vending machine, but, you know, having some words of gratitude and recognition of who I believe this higher being is, and then saying, what do you want me to do today? And having a dialogue, a pause, which could be done without the God part if that's not your thing, and then trying to end my day with that, and then build that into during the day. I'm not as a type A. I took your assessment and what did it say? I'm pushing but pressured. So we can talk about that in a moment. But where during the day I'm pausing a little bit more, so I'm not making quick decisions, and saying again, well, what are my options? What's a different way to go about this? And am I on a good path, or am I taking? And I'm not there, by the way. I'm still working on it. But
same.
Is this a good path, or am I taking it too far to an extreme, or am I missing some areas, or should I be taking a slightly different approach? What are your thoughts?
So, first of all, I think that it sounds absolutely beautiful. And something to know about me is that I'm not big on right and wrong, or even good or bad, in terms of labeling somebody's path or somebody's choices. It's really, to me, a matter of, are the choices that you're making effective based on your criteria of what effective is? So are your choices getting you closer to where you want to be? Is it helping you feel more aligned in the journey, or less aligned with yourself, with your own authenticity? And it sounds like for you, with whatever messaging you're receiving from source, from higher power. So I think it is for you.
Well, it's interesting because that also aligns with, we have 3 company values that Manage to Win. I now work for Blackpoint Cyber, a cybersecurity firm. But the firm that I founded is find the best way, do the right thing, everyone matters. And it's find the best way, which is what you're saying. I agree with that. So it's kind of find that best way. I'm curious to, it's interesting. I forgot one thought I had completely, but you brought up earlier a fear component that you were being driven by fear.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering, have you seen some people? I saw it first from Danny Silk, where he said there's two major emotions. Everything comes out of two major emotions, love and fear.
Mm-hmm.
And as I've thought about that, I have really agreed with what he has said. And I'm curious, have you heard something like that or similar? And if so, what's your conclusions? Because you mentioned the fear component that was driving you.
Yes.
And so what are your thoughts on that?
I completely agree. I gave a talk, gosh, it's probably been almost 6 years ago now, at Impact Summit. It was one of my favorite talks that I ever gave. And I think part of why I liked it so much is that I was able to share talking about self-acceptance and what that is, but I did it through such a personal lens story of a time that I was going through when my self-acceptance had really dropped, and the impact that was having on how much I was able to feel at home with myself or not feel at home with myself. And so in that talk, part of what I described as a metaphor is, who's driving you on your journey? Is fear at the wheel? And imagine that. Imagine you're driving in the car and fear is literally driving. What would fear drive like? Can picture the, white-knuckled, really stressed out and just like angsty, looking around all the time. Like, not the cool, calm, let me just check my blind spots, but just afraid all the time. I feel like I would be car sick if fear was driving me all the time. So what if fear is not the driver? A lot of people think if I don't have that fear of not being enough driving me, then I'll just become complacent. I won't do anything. And I remind them that fear is not the only option for who to drive. And fear is not going anywhere for the most part, for most of us. Some people are able to accomplish the incredible feat of ego death and truly have no fear, and fear literally nothing. But the vast majority of us still have fear. It's part of our survival instinct. So fear is not going to go anywhere. Fear can hang out in the backseat. That's fine. She's fine there. My fear is female. Love driving, very different vibe. If you picture, what does it feel like when love is driving the car? Much calmer, much smoother. She's love, so she's still looking out for our best interest. And fear's in the back seat. So if fear sees somebody about to run a red light and, run into you, fear's going to call that out so that you can react, and then she can just stay there. So imagine your life if love was driving you forward instead of fear. And that is the essence of being high on both self-acceptance and high on self-improvement, right? Which is, that's where I want to be, and that's where I want to help as many people in the world as possible get to. Let love be the thing that's driving you to improve, and not the fear of not being enough.
Yeah, I would think fear might also drive too fast because, hey, fear, I'm going to be late. I got to get there. I got to hurry.
Go.
These crazy drivers. And it's interesting how you make fear out to be a her. It reminds me of my favorite series of Person of Interest, where there's the machine, the AI machine that's been developed by Harold. And then a woman comes along and it's amazing. I can't remember her name at the moment, but she's great. But she calls the machine her. And she ends up having a direct connection with Root is her name. So, and she was a bad hacker, an evil person, and then she comes over. So, but she called the machine her. So it's kind of funny.
I keep writing all these things down that you're dropping. This is great.
Oh yeah.
I'm gonna
Person of Interest is that we've watched it twice. It's on Amazon for free. But it's the thing I like about it is the writing is so well done. So they it's like the writers, and I think they do this well in The Chosen too, which we enjoy, but the writers kind of think of, okay, where does the reader think we're going to go? How can we mess them up? So sometimes they're taking you this way and then they flip it. Sometimes they're just saying, hey, here's a new character. Okay, not going to see that person for five episodes, or they're just kind of mentioning the person and the person disappears. Or
oh, wow.
It just keeps you thinking.
Keep you on your toes.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's a lot of fun. So this radical self-acceptance. Now let's obviously we've got too much content here, but I'm curious. So if I'm a leader, I've got a team of people. I'm basically leading adult daycare, is what I like to say. So if I notice the people on my team have different levels of self-acceptance. We can be specific or not, and maybe you've got a story with an example, but how do I engage with them in a healthy, professional, appropriate way, one-on-one or as a group, to help them become more aware of how their past is affecting how they're processing information today, making decisions and prioritizing things in their lives?
I'll answer with what I think is the most powerful thought, although it might be annoying, which is the easiest way to invite others on your team to increase their own self-acceptance and self-awareness is to work on your own. So
definitely,
when you as a leader have a high degree of both self-awareness and self-acceptance, you are inherently making it easier for the people on your team to feel good about themselves in your presence. And that, to me, that's actually the essence of real leadership, because true leadership happens because you have followers, and followers will choose to follow you because they feel good about who they are in your presence. You can't force them to feel one way or the other about themselves, but you can make a lot of choices that make it easier for them to feel good about who they are with all their flaws and imperfections when they're around you. And what gets in the way often, and this, I went through this myself, I still go through it, I'm still very much on the journey. What gets in the way of that is the defensiveness, the subconscious defensiveness that leads leaders to send signals that they do not intend. It's part of actually what was happening at NASA. Part of why they brought me in as an organizational psychologist was the recognition that there was not enough psychological safety inside NASA for the engineers who were fearful for Columbia to speak up past a certain point. And there's a ton I could get into about that, but the book has a lot more detail. People are really curious about it, and they're, space geeks, which I with love.
So I'm struck by Jim Collins' book, Good to Great.
Yeah.
And the 11 or 14 top companies, all the leaders shared one trait. Do you know what that was?
Was it something around humility or?
Exactly. Humility.
Yeah. Yeah.
All of them had shared humility as a common trait.
Yep.
And if you are a humble leader and you can actually pull that off, not easy. And humble leaders typically fairly self-aware. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah.
Not always, but most of the time they are self-aware, they have gratitude, and they have some self-acceptance, whether it's acceptance, hey, I've got these flaws, I'm not that good of a person, so I shouldn't be full of ego. Or, they're just, they have a good balance of, I understand my good and my bad.
My favorite, and I wish I could remember who to attribute this to, my favorite quote about humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less.
Yeah, I like that one too. And I don't remember who it is either. And I'm not going to try to type it while we're on.
No, but I'll try to look it up because I always like to give credit to these amazing quotes that were just so profound to me. But the key to thinking of yourself less is that self-acceptance. When somebody is in a moment where they're struggling with self-acceptance, if I am struggling with self-judgment, that means that I've got insecurities that are starting to dominate my attention. When I am going through that, it is difficult for me to stay focused on anybody else. It is difficult for me to listen intently to what somebody else is saying. Whether I want to or not, subconsciously, I will make the things that they're saying about me. I will react with defensiveness. So it's always a higher degree of self-acceptance that enables somebody to show up with that true humility, where they're not thinking less of themselves. It's not about putting yourself down or thinking that you have nothing to offer. It's not about self-deprecation. It's, I don't need to think about me because I'm good. I'm cool. I make mistakes and I mess things up and I'm imperfect and all of that, but I don't have to worry about me right now. How are you? That ability to keep that focus outside.
It sounds like one of the challenges with this radical self-acceptance is what's the bar you're comparing yourself against? Because if you are a person who takes sales, for instance, all right, there are people who can succeed in sales because they are very driven by proving themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And they do big numbers and blah, blah, blah. And there are other people who succeed in sales. They may not make as much money as the person who's churning it, but they're amazing at sales.
Mm-hmm.
But it's hard for them to not notice the high achievers, which are being pumped up maybe by their manager or other things, and not feel bad that, man, I'm not that level. I guess I'm not very good. So how does somebody like that, I don't know how you want to put it, shift the focus or realize that's not the bar? That's not, it reminds me for the first time, I hadn't thought about this. It's like you're running a running race. And in cross country, my brother was a cross country runner. And, you're running a race through the hills and you got to make the right turns. And it's almost like you made the wrong turn and you're running towards the wrong endpoint in the race.
Mm-hmm.
There's a trail going there. Yes. And it looks well worn, but you're going to the wrong end. You're not going to cross the finish line. I don't know. But I'm curious your thoughts.
Yeah. Well, I think that as you're describing what it might be like for that person, you're hitting on something really important that I want to pull out, which is, what is the story in your head? So if the person who has different sales numbers than maybe let's call them the overachiever, who's constantly at the top of the leaderboard, I can look at...
But they have no life, by the way.
Right? Yes.
Yeah.
Which is like, how are you defining success? What does it even mean to be effective?
Sure.
If you're joyful in that, great. Like there are people that is fun for them and they don't have a life, so to speak. They're super obsessed with it. And if they're enjoying it, that's beautiful. I would want them to at least introspect and ask, is this everything that I want for myself? And how will I feel about me if this is pulled away? Am I still okay with me? Or do I feel like I'm going to fall apart now because my external source of validation and acceptance has been taken away? That's kind
of... Or Mack truck theory. If I get hit by a Mack truck tomorrow, is this how I want to be remembered? That all of a sudden, that's all I got?
Right. Had good sales numbers. Hey.
Yeah.
So this is where I get so passionate about the coexistence of self-acceptance and self-improvement. Because whether I am comparing myself to somebody else who I perceive as outperforming me, or I am comparing myself now to where I want to be, there's almost always going to be that gap. The gap is not a problem in and of itself. The challenge becomes, what story am I telling myself about the gap? If the story in my head is that this gap is evidence that I am not enough, then I'm in that self-judging category and I'm creating more hurdles for myself in my growth. If I look at that gap, not as evidence that I'm not enough, but rather as direction that I want to go, inspiration for what I think now is possible, amazing. Like, David, you know the story about Roger Bannister breaking the 4-minute mile?
Yes. Yeah.
So it was incredible when he did it in the 50s because doctors had literally written papers saying that the human body couldn't do it. It would fall apart. Self-limiting belief. It wasn't just that Roger Bannister broke the 4-minute mile. It was that later that same year, it had never been done in recorded history, but then just a couple months later, it was done again. So somebody else suddenly was able to change their belief and they said, well, gosh, if he can do it, I can too. And so that could be the story that you tell yourself if you're comparing yourself to somebody who seems to be, quote, outperforming you is, well, if they're achieving that, there's no reason that I can't too, if that's what I want.
If that's what I want.
Life. If that's what I want. Yes.
So I think that's critical. So if it's not what you want, but that's still haunting you.
Yeah.
That's still burdening you. How do you stop that?
Figure out, where is that story? If it's not what you want, whose voice is now embedded in your inner monologue telling you that that's what you're supposed to be, or that's what you're supposed to want. And,
And why are you giving it credibility?
Yeah, it's the shoulds. Shoulds are almost always external, and I like to joke sometimes, and hopefully it doesn't feel offensive but don't should all over yourself. Don't do it. Yeah. Right? Just as like a little silly way to say that. Don't notice when you're in that should mentality and ask yourself, where did this belief come from that I'm supposed to want this, that I'm supposed to be this? Because part of self-acceptance is accepting what you actually do want for yourself. And it might be different than what your parents wanted for you. It might be different than what your spouse thinks you're supposed to want for yourself. Letting yourself be okay with what you want for yourself is a huge part of self-acceptance.
Okay, now you're in trouble. So now you got to go back to, you had your deja vu moment, and you're realizing, what did you just say? You said something about changing the focus, but you didn't use that term. How did you word that just now? You talked about moving it where it's like, okay, I realized I don't want that. Where did the shoulds come from? Mm-hmm. And then you realize, and you're going to change. How did you word that? I lost it. Sorry, big body, small brain.
No, that's okay. I'm trying to remember what I said. I was talking about when there's the should happening and figuring out what is the source of that? Where did that come from? Whose voice is that?
And then you're going to choose a different.
Yeah.
You're going to shift. Now, you went through this.
I go through it regularly, David. It's a constant practice. I literally have Journey tattooed on my wrist as a reminder to myself that this, as far as I understand, this will be an ongoing journey that I experience my whole existence here on this planet.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good. So you've been through it. So how did you shift? What's the storyline? You had the shoulds, wherever they came from, your choice, whether you want to be specific. But you had the shoulds, and you shifted your journey. I'm not going to run down that path. I'm going to run this path. Now, there's still paths that pop up. As you mentioned, it's a journey. There's still paths, but hey, look at me over here. There's pretty flowers. Oh, look at me. There's a rabbit. Go see the rabbit, or whatever it might be, to stay with that running metaphor. But how did you make that shift? And how do you check in to make certain you're still on the path that you want to be on?
The funny thing about my story is that I've had minor shifts in my path, but I actually think that for me, it's been more about it's okay to pause and take a moment. That story that I opened with, where my husband was wanting us to go out to the movies, I was telling myself a story that I didn't have time to go do things for fun because I had to, or I needed to, or I should be working on my business. And so I'm still running the business that I started all those years ago. I just realized that was not a good reason for me to not allow myself to rest or relax or have fun. I was like, this is going to be the journey that I'm on forever. And so that was my invitation to get off of the hamster wheel of just the grind and not allowing myself breaks. And I think when I realized, if I'm successful with this business, because that was very early days, if I'm successful with this business, I will be running this business for the rest of my working life. So do I want to tell myself the story that I'm never allowed to build fun into my life? What am I doing to myself? And I was able to put together instances from my, early life where I got the message that it was not okay to be lazy. And, teenagers, from what I understand, need a lot more sleep than other categories of humans. And so I would sleep in so late on the weekend when I didn't have work. And, my dad was not having that. He wanted me to get up and start doing stuff. And so I just had these messages that I am not enough if I'm letting myself rest or play or have fun. And I don't think that was ever the intention. I mean, pragmatically, I can also look back and think about the times when my dad and both of my parents would encourage us to have fun or do things to relax. But my child brain would respond in such a hurt way if I thought that I had upset or disappointed my parents. And so I internalized that just totally inaccurately.
Yeah.
That makes sense?
And then, so I'm going to push you a little bit. So how did you redefine what you wanted to, well, let's jump forward to today. So how have you redefined what success means, what worthiness means? Mm-hmm. So when you have the moments that you pause, however often you try to do that, the bar you set is something different. What's the bar today that, hey, I'm okay?
So again, I will always have a bar that is higher than where I'm at. I always have the next goal, the next thing that I'm wanting to grow and improve, but I no longer look at that as evidence that I'm not enough right now. And so for me, it's been this practice. It's a self-acceptance practice. It's how I see it. And it is about acknowledging the gains, letting myself celebrate. I was so quick to dismiss celebrations in the past. Nothing really felt worthy of celebrating. It had to be huge for me to be able to acknowledge myself. And there's actually so much vulnerability in letting yourself feel proud of your own progress. And a lot of people don't want to step into that vulnerability. So for me, it's been about letting myself feel good along the way, pausing to be able to look back and see, we'll do quarterly reviews with my team every quarter. And we start with, what do we want to celebrate? And we have a celebrations channel in Slack. And so we celebrate in the moment when things happen. And we also, every single quarter, we pause and we say, what have we done? We do a retro. What do we get done? What do we accomplish? What are the things we want to celebrate? So it was a lot of little habits and patterns that helped me change how I feel about the gap between where I am and the bar that I've now set for myself. So the bar doesn't mean enough. The bar just represents direction of where I want to go.
No, I think that's really great. And I love the celebrations piece, but it sounds like you have a bar that you hold yourself against each day. Correct me if I'm wrong, because this is not what I heard you say. You have a bar each day that it's like, I need to do this to feel like I had a good day. I did something meaningful. But then I also have this stretch goal, this target. I call it an epic quest because I call goals targets. Like you got a target destination. I got this epic quest. Jim Collins calls it a BHAG. Gary Keller calls it a one thing. But I've got this higher thing that I want to go for. So, but is that what I'm hearing you say? I mean, it's not what I heard you say specifically, but it sounds like that's where you're at, because having that lower bar, lower's not bad, is that, hey, here's where I need for the radical self-acceptance, but I'm still striving for this other thing that's out there.
Yeah. I mean, there's an element of, where do I want to go and because I have all kinds of goals.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure. Always setting goals for myself, and they can be quarterly, they can be goals for the year, it can be goals for the day. Part of it's actually, how do I treat myself if I don't hit my goals for the day? When I'm on point, I will choose the three things that I want to get done today. And sometimes I am very foolish in that because I have maybe 6 meetings and I still put 3 big things that I wanted to get done that day. Okay. So at the end of the day, if I did not get those 3 things done, I only got 1 done, or maybe I only started 1 of them. What is my self-talk? Am I beating up on myself? Am I letting my inner critic rage at me? Am I looking at that to say, like, you're stupid, or that was bad, or what's wrong with you? Or am I able to simply learn and recalibrate and say, well, you know what? Those 6 meetings that I had today actually did move me closer to the things that I care about. So tomorrow I'll make sure to take note that 3 things probably can't coexist with 6 hours of meetings unless I'm going to work 12 hours, and that's not what I want to do. So it's just noticing, how do I treat myself when I do hit a goal and when I don't?
That's awesome. Yeah, it's awesome. And I totally agree with the power of 3. And what I developed years ago was each day I set 1 to 3 objectives for myself. And a client of mine and friend, Joe Cram, he started a company called Solid Networks. And he said, oh yeah, that's a win. What's important now? So he said, I set a win every day. And so I have taught clients for decades now, choose 1, 2, or 3, but the key is your win you get done. And then you have your B list. And so you can divide them. You can choose 3, you can set more, but the win is never more than 3. And those are the things, like you say, make you feel good or make you move the needle. It sounds like for high achievers, one thing they consider as a win is just what you just brought up, is that at the end of the day, I'm to be thankful for what I got done, and I'm going to feel good about myself. And I just need to reinforce that, because some of us don't do that well.
Yeah, for sure. It's a practice. And if I was struggling that day, what if I pick 3 things for myself to get done that day, and I'm not in 6 hours of meetings? I only had 1 meeting and I had all this time, and it seems like I would have been able to get those things done and I didn't. Still, how do I treat myself? So being high on self-acceptance and high on self-improvement says that I'm able to look and reflect and learn about what was going on for me that day without beating myself up. I actually want to lean into a self-compassion practice probably and say, hey, I'm not quite sure what was happening for me, but I was clearly struggling with something.
Yeah.
And okay, that doesn't take away my work.
Now, let me touch on, you got this book, The Missing Links, Launching a High Performance Company Culture. And you talk about, not too far in the book, why culture is important, but you talk about this situation with Apollo 13 and some problems that they had there. And you basically talk about Linda Ham and her inability to accept the possibility of failure. And was it this one, or was it Challenger where they had early tests? There were certain styrofoam or something. There was something that was breaking off of the wing. And yet they couldn't accept. They ended up accepting that, oh, well, that's just something that's going to happen, versus, we need to be concerned about this, because there was outside pressure. Failure was not an option. I remember from what you wrote, and I do recommend the book, folks. It's well written and there's some good stuff. But talk about that, how to recognize. You see, one of my problems I realized was I would make difficult decisions not based on facts, which NASA had a problem with in some cases, very smart people, great people. But I would make a decision based on a hoped for outcome. I've got this employee, they're not performing well, but it's easier for me to keep them and hope that they work out rather than fire them.
Right.
Yeah, that's one example. So, but talk about this situation, because I think that relates to what you were talking about a moment ago, where how do you recognize you've got some outside pressure that might be distorting your conclusions, decisions, how you're prioritizing things?
From a leadership perspective, this is where it becomes really critical to create psychological safety so that everybody feels like they have a voice, because it can be very difficult to know what are all of the forces that are influencing my beliefs and my behavior. But if I have created the environment, the psychological safety for the people around me to share that feedback with me, they will help me see it. And so I think that's a huge part of this, is how can I open the channels of communication and respond non-defensively in the face of feedback from people on my team or even my peers, so that we can make the best decisions together. This is how you actually do get the most out of teams, because there were people that could see this happening. And so what you're talking about, so the Columbia disaster happened because foam fell off the external tank and it hit the wing. Normally, when foam had been falling off the external tank and hitting the orbiter, because it was happening a lot, it would hit on the underbelly of the orbiter, which had much stronger tiles. The wing, and it was the leading edge of the wing, was reinforced carbon-carbon. It was not nearly as strong as the tiles, and so they did not know the extent of the damage that was there. But there were 3 different teams across the agency that saw the video and were really concerned. And even though this higher governing body said foam strikes are not an in-flight issue, which they said they're not an in-flight issue because they never had been. So that's called normalization of deviation, right? It's happened before, didn't cause a safety threat, happened before, didn't cause a...
All leaders have that problem.
Yeah. And so these 3 teams were worried. There were 3 different requests made through informal channels to see, can we get imagery? We don't have the data to know how badly the orbiter was damaged. Can we reposition satellites, which, David, is not a small ask. I heard that it was in the millions of dollars to like go interrupt DOD and ask them to do this. And if they did, and they saw the damage, they didn't actually have a plan. There's no manual on the shuttle that says, well, here's how you go fix a hole in the wing. Maybe, just like Apollo 13, maybe they could have figured it out if they knew. But the requests were, can we please get more data? But none of them were going through the proper channels because they knew technically there wasn't a requirement for it because it had been deemed a post-flight issue. And of course, you mentioned Linda Ham, she was the mission manager, and her focus, she was supposed to be responsible for schedule and budget and technical and safety. That's crazy. That is an org design flaw. That's a huge problem. It was one of the first things that NASA did to change things around. Give safety and technical a separate but equal seat at the table with schedule and budget. So that was it. That's too much to put on any one person. Yeah. So there's all these different factors. But there were people that were like, we're concerned and we want to speak up. And yes, I know that you're focused on how does the foam strike impact processing for Columbia's next launch, but we're worried right now because there were people that could see it. They could see it because they had different views. It's like the blind man and the elephant. You know that parable?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And we talk about it in the book. It's such a great, simple example. You don't want to start arguing, right? The man holding the fan or holding the ear of the elephant thinks that it's a fan, and the man holding the tail thinks it's a rope. If they're arguing, no, it's a fan. No, it's a rope. No, it's a fan. How silly is this? But we do it in organizations all the time. Instead of saying, tell me more about your perspective, tell me more about what you're seeing, there's this, no, that's not how it is. It's like this. And that's where it just becomes too much. How can any one person possibly know all of the invisible forces that are playing into their behaviors and beliefs? You've got to depend on openness from the team. And so that's the leader's responsibility to create the psychological safety to invite that level of openness.
So I'm laughing not because of the seriousness of the situation, but we've already talked for about an hour. So
yeah,
Laura, will you come back on the show?
I'd be happy to. Absolutely.
Okay. So I feel like we're just getting started. And I say that often because I'm blessed with having great guests. Oh. And so I will work it out with Gabby to talk to you. But in the meantime, people can check out your book, The Missing Links, Launching a High-Performance Company Culture. I'm holding it up, but most of our people listen. And how can they learn more about you if they want to learn more about you before we talk again?
Yes. Well, I think given a lot of our focus for today, I'll just mention the quiz. So if your listeners are curious about the self-acceptance quiz and you want to know where do you fall today on the self-acceptance and self-improvement quadrant, then you can just go to selfacceptancequiz.com, and it only takes 3 to 5 minutes. And then you'll receive your report instantly, and you'll receive some coaching emails from me that give you some insight, based on your results. So that's one way for us to be connected. The other way I would say is LinkedIn. I like to post on LinkedIn quite a bit, and just let me know that you heard me here on David's show, and I'll be happy to connect.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for being on the show, Laura, and I look forward to having you back.
Same.